Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all races, colors, and creeds, welcome back to the greatest show on earth, the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, here every day on I try to be here every day on FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Okay, I know that you watched the State of the Union yesterday, along with millions and millions of other Americans who are hoping and praying that one of their political parties pulls this country together. Well, folks, forget about it. They're playing the Hegelian dialectic, I tell you many times. Last night was the perfect example of it. Perfect example of Jesuitism at work. You saw it right there. Trump gives a speech. His base and the right wing love it. Nancy Pelosi of the left wing tears up the speech in plain view. And the little children argue on, and the people of America either love it or hate it, depending on what side of the coin you're tossing today. For example, half the country loves what Nancy Pelosi did. In fact, a number of senators said they wish there was a shredder on her table instead of her having to rip it up. If you're on the other side of the coin, you hated what she did and you love what Trump said. Nobody here is dealing with the facts. Nobody here is dealing with anything but an attempt to cause chaos in this country, which is going to lead to a global government. Yes, it's going to lead to socialism one day. That's why you have these young upstarts in Congress openly professing that socialism is coming to America. So get used to it. You're going to be socialized, you're going to be papacized, and I mean you're going to be right under the papacy's wing. And why do I say that? Because it's the story never told. Now, let's get this straight. Coming out of the mouths of many right-wing journalists and right-wing talk show hosts are great things about America. The Constitution is a great document. And many, many things, and people in America are great people fighting for this country. Now, if you're on the other side of the coin and you're a Democrat, there's many good people on that side of the aisle too. And I'm not talking about Adam Schiff and all of the top-level Republican and Democrats. I'm talking about people who want to see America prosper. But you're getting brainwashed. You're not getting the whole story from either of these two groups. Now, I have nothing against, personally, any of these people, unless they realize the great conspiracy to overthrow this country that began long before the Constitution was written. And we've gone over it many, many times. So how do you ever expect to get the truth when we can go back? I'm going back today, of course, to the trial of John Surratt and all of the conspirators in the Lincoln assassination. If we can't even get to that, then how can we ever get to the truth about things like Oklahoma City, things like 9/11, things like the assassination of President Kennedy? And how about the other 4 or 5 presidents that were assassinated by the Jesuits behind the scenes that you never know about? You don't even know. When you hear the history books, all you hear is John Wilkes Booth. He was a patsy, just like Oswald. And so, to give you a little history, I'm going to read to you a little bit from a book written by Burke McCarty, which I've been talking about the last couple of days, to give you an idea how the history has been taken from you. And why I'm doing it is because you're realizing when you watch this theater in Washington that you're getting the same treatment today, and it's leading to what the Jesuits and what the hierarchy of this country have always wanted, and that is control. Total control of your life. And if you don't believe me, go look who started socialism, who did the Paraguay experiments in the 1600s. Then go look at the connections they had with Marx and Lenin, Stalin, all these people, Hitler, and then say, how do we deal with them here in this country? Because they take away all of your possibilities of reading about them. And the great historians in our country seem to overlook it as well. Whether they're bought and paid for, or whether they're frightened of this power, is not for me to tell. But it's for me to tell you that when I read this book that was written in 1922, I get chills because I realize it's now 2020 and we're 100 years into this thing from this point, and it's gotten worse. So listen what they said. Now, there was a guy named General T.M. Harris, and he nails the priests, the Jesuits' attempt to whitewash Mrs. Surratt and John Surratt, a couple of the co-conspirators in the Lincoln assassination. Now, there were a number of them, but let me read to you. It says here, the review of his trial of John Surratt, many people don't even know he went on trial, made by General T.M. Harris, who was a member of the military court-martial which tried and convicted the 4 co-conspirators and sentenced 4 others to the dry tortugas. That's 8 in the Lincoln assassination, so it wasn't a lone gunman. And when he was written in response to the charges of Mrs. Surratt's confessor, the pastor of St. Patrick's Roman Church of Washington, D.C., who had dared to raise his voice in defense of this woman 27 years after her execution. General Harris's book, the only one of its kind, has so effectually and completely nailed the ecclesiastical liar that it has been removed from most public libraries. This was in 1922. So how many other books do you think have been removed in the last 100 years? So you can't ever get to the truth of how this country was formed. I could give you a few names. How about the Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci? How about the bells toll for him? And tell you this about how he orchestrated, and there are many facts, orchestrated the Revolutionary War, helped mastermind it, and then create this country so that Rome and Catholicism could get in here. Now, many people go, well, so what? They're good people. Well, there are many good Catholics. But I'm talking about the same people that masterminded the Lincoln assassination that you're never told about, coming from the papacy, coming from the Jesuits. The hierarchy of the same group of people are still doing it today, still providing all of this intrigue in our country behind the scenes, and many of our politicians work for them. Now, General Harris's book, back then, he talked about the Jesuit lies and everything, but those were taken out of the library. And because it's gone out of print, and because it's not accessible to the readers, Burke McCarty is incorporating the whole chapter on Father Walter, page 204, for the benefit of her readers and for your benefit. So I'm going to read this to you to give you an idea what you've been deprived of. And she said this is taken from General Harris's book. From the time of the trial of the co-conspirators by a military commission and of the execution of Mrs. Surratt by the order of President Johnson, Father Walter, a secular priest of Washington City, has made himself conspicuous by his efforts to pervert public opinion on the result of the trial of the conspirators by the commission. Whilst rebel lawyers, editors, and politicians have boldly assailed the lawfulness of the commission and have denounced it as an unconstitutional tribunal and have characterized the trial as a Star Chamber trial, as a contrivance for taking human life under a mockery of a judicial procedure with no purpose of securing the ends of justice, Father Walter and other priests whose sympathies were with the Southern Confederacy have earnestly seconded their efforts by the invention and circulation of cunningly devised falsehoods. Now, don't we hear this coming from the right wing now to the left wing? We hear the same thing. Adam Schiff's Star Chamber. President Trump not given due process. Basically a kangaroo court. So this has been going on for years. Now, Father Walter has never now and then bobbed up with the assertion of Mrs. Surratt's entire innocence, knowing that no one in 1,000 of our people has ever read the testimony on which she was convicted. He feels that he can boldly assert there was not enough evidence against her to hang a cat. He's also become bold enough to state as facts what the evidence shows to the falsehoods. As an example of this, in an article in the Catholic Review, he asserts, in regard to Mrs. Surratt's trip to Surrattville on the afternoon of the day of the assassination, that she had ordered her carriage for the trip, which was purely on private business. On the forenoon of that day, and before it was known that the president would go to the theater, why, if this was true, was it not proven in her defense? There was no such testimony produced. The testimony on this point against her was that shortly after 2 o'clock in the afternoon she went upstairs to Weichmann's room, tapped at the door, and when it was opened, she said to Mr. Weichmann, "I have just received a letter from Mr. Calvert that makes it necessary for me to go to Surrattville today and see Mr. Nothery." So basically what's going on here, Weichmann, they're talking about all of the lies that came from the Catholic priests and the Jesuits regarding trying to whitewash really what happened to Surratt, really what happened to the Lincoln assassination. And really the problem is the confession of Surratt would have proved very interesting reading, and it might have led in a flood of light of some places, but it was never made public. Why must the public wait 27 years, she said, and instead of having the full confession be required to content itself in so great a case with the mere assertion, the Reverend Father, based on his alleged knowledge, and just that. It's incredible when you start looking at this. Now, the other day, I went over and read to you some of the facts of the trail of the arch-co-conspirator, John H. Surratt, her son, and what he did after the Lincoln assassination and the others in his cabinet were basically earmarked for assassination. And we found out that Surratt was aided by Jesuits, Catholic priests, to get to Montreal, where he then was sent to England. From there, he ended up working as a Swiss guard in the papacy, being protected by them. Now, there's an interesting letter and notes that's in this book that came out when they were looking for Surratt, and it's dated only a few weeks after Surratt disappeared and what they thought was in England or Rome. The following order was sent to the War Department from President Andrew Johnson, the successor to Lincoln. And he said this: all persons claiming reward for the apprehension of John Wilkes Booth, Louis Payne, G.A. Alterzod, David E. Harold, and Jefferson Davis, and John H. Surratt, and either of them are notified to file their claims and their proofs with the Attorney General for final adjudication. The reward for the arrest of Jacob Thompson, Beverly Tucker, George W. Sander, W. G. Cleary, and John H. Surratt are hereby revoked by the order of the President. Naturally, with revoking the order for the arrest of Surratt, his chances for his safety from expatriation from his crime were multiplied manyfold. On September 30th, our consulate at Liverpool sent the following cable in code to the Secretary of State at Washington: Sir, since my dispatch number 538, the supposed Surratt has arrived in Liverpool and is now staying at the oratory of the Roman Catholic Church of the Holy Cross. His appearance indicates him to be about 21 years of age, rather tall and tolerably good-looking. According to the reports, Mrs. Surratt was a very devout Roman Catholic, and I know clergymen of that persuasion on their way to and from America have frequently lodged while in Liverpool at the same oratory, so that the fact of this young man going there somewhat favors the belief that he is the real Surratt. I cannot, of course, do anything further in the matter without Mr. Adams' instructions and a warrant. If it be Surratt, such a wretch ought not to escape. Okay, so as we look at this, we're seeing that the Jesuits who masterminded this plot, who will never be told in American history books, also aided in hiding Surratt from authorities. Now, the author of this book, Burke McCarty, makes a good point here. She says the Oratory of the Holy Cross was the Roman Catholic clearinghouse through which the ecclesiastical agents passed between this country and the Vatican during their activities through the Civil War. And now, with the official correspondence to show that Surratt's moved there, let me make more facts to show you the connection between the Vatican, the Jesuits, and the killing of Lincoln. When Surratt left the home of Porterfield, he was taken under the wings of the French priests, from under which he never departed until they had seen the ship surgeon on the Peruvian and arranged for his safe passage. The facts brought out at the two trials of Surratt, after he had finally been returned to the United States, showed that the fugitive had gone to a little village some 60 miles out of Montreal, skirting the pine woods, in an ideal place for that purpose. The parish priest's name was Boucher. Here he secreted and kept Surratt for several weeks. When the hunt got too hot in Montreal, which was being combed thoroughly for him, he was French Catholics who worked for the most part in the lumber camps and were in their location, as well as their lack of education, cut off from the rest of the world and its doings, helped them get away. They were subservient to their priests, so much so that they would no more have thought of criticizing the priest's acts than they would of God himself. So consequently, when a strange young man appeared at the parish house, nothing was thought of it. And someone with just a drop of rebellious blood in him might have asked himself, "Is this another mouth to feed?" He would whisper it so softly, and even his guardian angel could not hear it. After several weeks of his life in the Canadian village, Surratt became restless and anxious to hear from the States, for we must remember that all his mail and newspapers were censored by his priestly guardians, as he afterwards told in his Rockville lecture. Each time, the Holy Mother Church would step in and ally his anxiety, and received almost weekly visits from that other valued and trusted friend, Priest Lapierre of Montreal. Once he insisted, Priest Lapierre took him back to Montreal in citizen's clothes, and Surratt disguised as a hunter. You will note the solicitude of these French priests concerning this American youth who had a price of $25,000 on his head, dead or alive, for the killing of Lincoln, right? It is not an eloquent fact, not only their personal guilt, but the guilt of their church, that they never thought of surrendering him and receiving the reward, notwithstanding the inordinate love of money which characterizes Roman priests. Do you think for one moment that these priests in Canada or the priests in Washington would have dared to have become parties in this conspiracy, thereby involving their church without the full knowledge of the Roman hierarchy? Priests receive all their orders from the Pope through their bishops. Would this obscure native-born American boy have been so carefully protected and cared for as he was by these priests without the command of the Vatican? You must remember that this government had sent broadcast the warning that anyone who would be found aiding, abetting, and protecting, comforting, or in any way assisting any of the conspirators of the Lincoln assassination would be held as co-partners in the crime with them and dealt with accordingly. There is not a record that Burke McCarty saw that would have been able to find wherein there is one word back then of criticism and disapproval or any official regret or otherwise on the part of the Roman Catholic Church. Hierarchy for the participation of the Romanists connected with this conspiracy which consummated in the murder of Lincoln. There is not in the large collection of official condolences received by this government upon the death of Lincoln, coming from every civilized country in the world, one word from the Pope of Rome And this in view, mark you, of the fact that the Pope was king of the Papal States and had more subjects in this country than any other ruler in Europe. Pius IX, by his silence at this time, made a confession of his guilt written in letters of fire, unquenchable fire, which brands him and his Jesuits with the brand of Cain in their hearts and the minds of American people, when they shall have been given a full knowledge of the Jesuit responsibility in the conspiracy and destruction of this popular government on that Good Friday night in Ford's Theater, April 14th, 1865. So, what I'm getting at here is, if we knew the truth about these people, what they did in the past, and I'm not just stopping with Lincoln, but what has happened since then to this day, there is no reason that we would allow these elected officials who work for them to continue putting America at risk. Now, why I say this is that although you can take one side or the other right now, the left or the right, you don't hear a word about anything like this. But always something crops up, doesn't it, that we never get the truth about. One of our biggest failures is to really face who is at the bottom of all this, and who has been at the bottom of this ever since the formation of our country. I'm not throwing everything out the window, saying America should start over again. All I'm saying is that we should be able to deal with this history, just like the people on the left and right always say to us. But why don't we ever get this story? Why haven't we ever heard anything, at least the facts on the table, about the Lincoln assassination? Why? There's something so big here that they can't let the supposed cat out of the bag. And so the lies continue. The hiding of things continue. The craziness in our government goes on and on and on. Now you're seeing it come to a head almost. We see no faction in this government working together. We see nothing but, you saw it on display in the State of the Union last night. How do you think normal, sane-minded people that are supposedly intelligent running a country act like this? Unless there is a hidden agenda. And the hidden agenda lies right in this book. If we have not learned, or we're not allowed to read this stuff, where does it take us? I'm not saying get rid of the American Constitution. I'm not saying get rid of the life that you lead in America, capitalism. I'm saying we could basically, what Trump says, let's take it one step further. Let's clean out the Jesuit swamp. Let's let America know really what happened to us, and let us make our own minds up. How should we continue to allow these people to control us from within and not know the truth about this? And as Burke McCarty says, why among government detectives from this country would have thought to search the houses of priests for their fugitive? They didn't know back then. How much chance would they have had to secure a search warrant from such search in the French Canada if they had? The Roman Catholic system operates in safety throughout its institutions in this country and Canada. It still does. It is only in, believe it or not, Catholic Mexico, where people who have been burdened by the papal yoke for years have been progressive enough to make laws and operate them that a search warrant can be obtained with which these hellholes of the Pope of Rome in their country can be reached. Now, that was 100 years ago. I don't know if that exists today. But anyway, back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app. for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, folks, we are back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, going over some of the hidden facts regarding the assassination of Abe Lincoln. And many people go, well, Greg, why is it so important to really nail to the wall the Vatican Jesuits for the assassination of Lincoln? Well, one, legally, there's no statute of limitations on murder. And secondly, he's an important figure in our country, and if we can't get to the truth of that, just imagine all the other things that are hidden from us. But secondly, the question is, well, what are you going to get out of it if, everyone understands this? What'll happen? Well, it is my hope that if people put all this information together, we won't have the craziness that goes on in our country the way it is. We won't have the divisions. Look, people disagree on policy, but together we should be able to work together to make this country a better place. We don't need the crisis of the drugs that flow into this country. We don't need to have a crisis regarding our borders. All this stuff can be worked out, but not as long as the people behind the scenes that I talk about here are allowed to control our system of government, allowed to control us. And if we knew this, our right-wing and left-wing journalists would be much different, much different. It would be my hope that there really would be a constitution in this country protecting our rights. It would be my hope there really would be freedom of speech. But we know as long as the Jesuit Vatican hand is involved in this, as it's been since the beginning of our country, it will never be. So, this is an important paragraph right here that Burke McCarty wrote over, 100 years ago? And let me read it to you again. Do you realize that in Mexico 100 years ago, a Roman priest or nun has not the right of suffrage, that they cannot vote or enjoy any of the rights or privileges which accompanies the ballot box? And yet we supposedly intelligent Americans not only permit them to vote, but they are today the dominating force in politics of every large city in the United States. Think of it. That was 100 years ago, and they haven't gone unchecked since then. So where does it all come down to? All the powerful machinery, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, says Burke McCarty, was set in motion from the moment after the murder of Lincoln to shield Surratt, John Surratt, the other co-conspirators, many who basically went to trial and convicted in a military court. But the justice for his awful crime, and we have public documents, she says, which to brand these ecclesiastic plotters. There are public records. Notwithstanding the fact that the U.S. War Department knew exactly every step taken by the young fugitive Surratt from the day he sailed for Europe, no effort was made to arrest him. The startling knowledge, however, came to the attention of certain members of Congress, and the matter was brought up in the body and the committee appointed to investigate the same. And there was a report in the Judiciary Committee in the 39th Congress, House of Representatives, Report 33, Second Session, March 2nd, 1867. Look at what that Judiciary Committee is about today. It's a joke. If you look at the head of the Judiciary Committee right now, a New York Democrat, Jerry Nadler, I mean, if that's the best we can put forward, it isn't us putting them forward. It's the Jesuits behind the scenes, trust me. And when I use that word, I'm not just talking about somebody wearing the collar. I'm talking about all the minions that work for them. Now, in that report, they talk about Surratt. They talk about him leaving, what we talked about earlier, and it talks about him going to Rome and ending up there being protected by the papacy. So, why don't we go really to a real important section of her book, which is overlooked by many people. And there's a chapter in it that's called The Trial of John H. Surratt. And the real important thing here is that none of this stuff ever gets out. I mean, and if it does, the Vatican is always protected. Now, I remember the story I did years ago. And let me just refresh my memory and yours about this story and why it is important. The head of the School of Foreign Service, the guy who created it, was a priest, a Jesuit priest at Georgetown University, which is right next to the White House, named Father Edmund Walsh. Now, we've talked about some of his escapades. One, carrying a satchel of money to make sure that Joseph Stalin took over the Bolshevik Party and was put in power. He's a Vaticanite. We've talked about how Stalin was protected by the Jesuits, how that's hidden from us. But we also didn't, have talked about Walsh when he was given the assignment to oversee the trial of Nuremberg. And he basically was behind the scenes telling the judge what to do and making sure that the Vatican and all of their shenanigans with the Nazis was protected. And also that many of the high-level Nazis never received any amount of justice and were sent off through the Vatican rat lines and were protected in Argentina, America, Canada, and many different places where these Nazi war criminals were protected. And our government knew everything about it. So does that tell you a little bit about what these people are all about and what they're about today? From the very moment, now this is Burke McCarty talking about the Surratt trial, which is key because they used, I was going to say Oswald, him as a patsy. They did the same thing with Kennedy. But what they did was they used Booth as a patsy. And from the very moment the warship Swatara returned with John Surratt, bound hand and foot from Rome, and all the wheels of the Roman Catholic political Jesuit machine were set in motion for his certain release. The intense excitement which had enveloped the trials of the conspirators 2 years previous had naturally subsided perceptibly, this, of course, being an advantage to the prisoner, and the smallest details were looked after by the array of high-priced lawyers who fought the 2 legal battles for this penniless young traitor and assassin. His attorneys, Messrs. Merrick, Bradley, and Bradley, were Romanized. The former, a professed Catholic, and the other 2, by strong sympathy, left no stone unturned in the building of his defense, although his alibi, so carefully planned and presented, was soon shattered by a number of reputable witnesses, who could not be shaken by the unprofessional tactics which these lawyers resorted to. So basically, he was out of the military courts and into a civil court, a criminal court. His attorneys, like I mentioned, were a professed Roman Catholic. Now, the first step in the proceedings was a motion filed by the state's lawyers, from which is quoted here in part. In the Supreme Court of the District of Columbia, United States, against John H. Surratt, indictment murder. And now on this day to wit, the 10th day of June, 1867, come the United States and the said John H. Surratt by their respective attorneys, and the jurors of the jury, impaneled and summoned, also come, and hereupon the said United States by their attorney challenge the array of the said panel, because the saith that said jurors comprised of this panel were not drawn according to the law, that the names from which jurors were drawn were not selected according to the law, and they were filing a motion to quash the jurors. They were trying to, basically, the defense was trying, and the Vatican, who was controlling this behind the scenes, was trying to whitewash the trial from the very beginning. So, we should note that the 2 charges were that the names were not drawn according to law for the jury, and that they were not selected according to law. And the law was bypassed, and there's a lot here about how they did that, and I'm not going to get into that. So anyway, they were trying at the very outset to basically get him off and to protect who was behind him. Now, it is notable that there were 16 Romanists out of the 26 in the first panel drawn in that irregular manner. Now, Georgetown, a Jesuitized Georgetown, was constantly in evidence at the trial. The priests from the Jesuit college were there, and the students who were just dismissed for their vacations were on hand, and would always make it a particular point to greet Surratt, who had been a student of that institution for 2 years. Now I talk about Jesuit Georgetown. What about that? Does anybody really care? Do you think they've changed? No, of course not. Now, Surratt was scarcely, throughout this whole trial, without a priest at his side. It's a small wonder that the priests of Rome gave every assistance to the prisoner at bar. Their interests were inseparable. The interest of the Roman Church in this country was deeply involved, and no one appreciated this more than Surratt. He was confident and defiant all through the weeks of what would have been the most young men an endurable ordeal, stimulated by the knowledge that all of the powerful machinery of his church was being used in his defense, and that his liberty was guaranteed. So, here you have Jesuit Georgetown, who still sits there. One of its departments, the School of Foreign Service, by Jesuits, put out all of our diplomats. Now, why is this forgotten? Aren't they ever held accountable? No, they're not held accountable today. And if they could get away with this, and it can go undetected for hundreds of years, what do you think else is going to happen? Now, why? Ask yourself. If this was an institution was after the truth, if they weren't hiding something, why would they want to get this man off? If there's irrefutable evidence that he was involved in killing in the assassination of Lincoln and the others that were pegged for assassination that day in his cabinet. Because, folks, the ends justifies the means. All Surratt had to do was go to confession, and they would forgive him because the ends justifies the means. And what are the ends? You're seeing them being played out right before our very eyes. Socialism, globalism in America. Taking away all your rights. That's exactly what the papacy and these people have stand for all along. And to get away with this, they have to control both sides. Both the Republicans and the Democrats in our present-day government. So he was confident and defiant throughout all of this, just like they are today, because they're protected. Now, Surratt was bold, cold-blooded, unscrupulous, unrepentant criminal who had been steeped in the immoral teachings of the doctrines of the Jesuits from his earliest childhood, when his misguided mother had placed him under the guidance of Priest Wiggett at the boys' preparatory school at Gonzaga College, a fact which was testified to by the gentleman at Surratt's trial. My question to you folks today is, do you think they've changed today? And if so, tell me. Tell me what evidence you have that they're not doing something behind the scenes. And you're going to say, well, what evidence do you have, Greg? And the point being is, we can go back to these testimonies, these trials, and basically say, if they have the power to cover this up through education, through controlling what's being taught to our children, no, they've done it in many, many cases since. Now, Surratt's lawyers presented the following petition at the beginning of the trial. And from the very beginning of this petition, duplicity and innuendo were used, and unprofessional conduct of the most flagrant character were resorted to. The state's witnesses were badgered, abused, and bulldozed, so much so that the judge had to interfere more than once. Especially was this the fact in the case of Dr. Macmillan, the ship surgeon of the Peruvian, to whom Priest LaPierre introduced Surratt under the name of McCarthy. The physician made a splendid witness and refused to be confused, but the attorney for the defendant was so abusive that the witness gave an angry response in pure self-defense. The papal venom, folks, says Burke McCarty, showed itself all through the trials of Surratt in the never-ceasing effort of his attorneys to stab the memory of Lincoln, and through their contention that the military court, which had convicted Surratt's mother, had been an usurpation of power by President Johnson and the act of a tyrant. When one reads the records of those trials, one marvels that in such a short time after the passing out of a great man, these tools of ecclesiastical murderers would dare to venture so far out in the open with their treasonable utterances. When court was called to order in the John H. Surratt trial, Judge Fisher presiding said, "Gentlemen, this is the day assigned for the trial of John H. Surratt, indicted for the murder of Abraham Lincoln, the late President of the United States. Are you ready to proceed?" Surratt's lawyer, Mr. Bradley, answered, "The prisoner is ready, sir, and has been from the first. This unnecessary falsehood was a beginning quite in the keeping with the life and action of the prisoner, and his Jesuit attorney brazenly tried to implant in the minds of the jury the innocence of his client, who had fled to Canada, then put the Atlantic Ocean between them and his pursuers when he arrested at Velletri, Italy, dashed himself down an unscalable precipice to evade being returned to his native land. Nothing less than Roman effrontery could have proffered such an answer to that question. Are you ready? Desperate. Flight has never been used as an argument for readiness before. And Burke McCarty wagers, and it gives the keynote of the conduct of the defense, this is just a sample of one of those little Jesuit jokes No doubt his attorney had a mental reservation when he assured the court that his client had been ready from the first to skip again, if the slightest opportunity offered itself. Mental reservation is one of the ethics of the Jesuit theology. The Roman Catholic religion was first dragged into by Surratt's own lawyer, R.T. Merrick, when they had called attention to a telegraph dispatch to the New York Herald in which the fact that the state had demanded a new jury impaneled because there were 16 Romanists out of 26 jurors called in the first panel. The district attorney interrupted by showing that the news came from Washington, and as afterwards proved that it was but one of the many press dispatches which were instigated by the defense to prejudice the public in Surratt's favor. This trial, when you go through it, and we'll go through it some more, you got to get the book, if you can still find it, The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, The Suppressed Truth About That, Burke McCarty, written, I believe, in 1922. Get it, read this, you'll find that it was a whitewash from the beginning to end. Reminded me of the impeachment thing they did. There were no facts that proved a crime. They had gone through this thing over and over again just to diminish Trump in the eyes of the left-wing media, who carried since the beginning of Trump's presidency, which is the beginning, we shouldn't just look, Trump has been used here by the powers that be to represent the American people, the people who want to see America flourish, who want to see the Constitution upheld. And what they're showing us is that this is your last effort. It's kind of like the Alamo. You're going to get ripped apart. We're going to use every lie, just like they did in the Surratt trial, every lie, every way possible, because the ends justifies the means. You can't run your country. We are going to run it for you in line with canon law, not the Constitution of the United States. Now, people have asked me, what do you think about Trump? Do you think he is on the level? Folks, I hate to tell you this. He's just a figurehead used to represent you who are on the level, the last of the American people. You're seeing now a young group of millennials. You're seeing the Socialist Democratic Party change before your very eyes, leading in what's going to be the downfall of this country. We even have the Republican press. We have the right-wing journalists. We have congressmen, senators even saying if the Democrats, the Socialist Democrats, are allowed to come in, they are going to change the face of America entirely. Its way of life, what you're allowed to do, even take away private land. So they're telling you right up front what's going to happen. Now, the question is, will it happen? And my point is, if you don't understand that they've been doing this for hundreds of years, and that they're not going to be stopped now, then, the thing I'm trying to say is maybe it is too late. They are so entrenched and people can't even grasp who is behind this, who is really behind it. And just like the Jesuits were behind Surratt, holding his hand throughout this whole trial, they're holding the hands of everybody in power right now, trying to destroy this country. They're holding the hands of Ocasio-Cortez. They're holding the hands of Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler. And they're even holding the hands of the high-level Republicans who know what's going on. They know they have to play both sides, control both sides. We have to have this chaos in order to get the synthesis they want. They've played it in every way possible. They've done it in every war, playing both sides, controlling both sides, just as they controlled Nazism, just as they controlled us on this side of the border. Yes. So, how do we know? History is our guide. Don't we hear everyone always say, why do we let history, if we don't learn from history, it will repeat itself? Well, doesn't that apply here? Of course it does. But they don't want you to know that. Either the left or the right don't. Now, a big thing came up yesterday, and I wanted to end the show with this for just a minute. Rush Limbaugh, who is a right-wing icon in American talk radio, announced that he had advanced lung cancer. I pray for him, of course. He's a man that has stood by the right, and many people respect him. Now, Trump gave him the Medal of Freedom, and the left wing just jumped on him. He doesn't deserve it, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the real point here, that you have, and I'm going to use him, you have the right wing and the left wing fighting. Now, I can remember when Rush Limbaugh first took the microphone, and to show you how they operated, I didn't understand the Vatican until I went to Rome in the 80s and understood it. And then when he took the microphone, I started to understand how this operates, because before that I was a down-earth liberal. And then when I really saw how they manipulated me throughout my life, how they're manipulating people today, I really understood what's going on. Nothing against these people at all, and I only wish that they would tell this story as well. That would be my hope. And so, as we end this, please remember, try to get this book. And it's one of the many that have been taken out of circulation regarding the real truth about how our country was formed and what's going on today, where it came from. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.